Ashley woke up with a knot in her stomach. The grayish light of a cloudy day barely filtered through the curtains. As she sat up in bed, her breathing was fast and shallow, as if her body was anticipating what was to come. The day of the interview had arrived, and although she had prepared as best as she could, the pressure was crushing her chest. Her mind raced. Was she really ready to return to the working world after all this time? Her thoughts intertwined with memories of long nights caring for the twins and days when her career seemed like a distant dream. She got up slowly, careful not to wake her husband, David, who was still sleeping peacefully beside her. The lines on his face revealed sleepless nights, worried about the burden Ashley had taken on by deciding to return to work. He had always been understanding, but deep down, Ashley sensed he also feared this change. In the kitchen, as she prepared breakfast for the kids, every movement felt mechanical. The fear was there, lurking, reminding her of all the times she had thought it might be better to stay home, where everything was safe. The twins, Ethan and Emily, burst into the kitchen like a whirlwind of energy. Their laughter echoed through the walls of the house, filling it with life. Yet today, Ashley, who usually found comfort in her children's innocence, couldn't calm her mind. "Mommy, why do you look so serious?" Ethan asked, his childlike tone full of concern. His brown eyes looked up at her, reflecting a sensitivity that often surprised her. Ashley knelt down to his level and, with a forced smile, gently stroked his cheek. "I'm not serious, sweetie. I'm just thinking about important things. Today is a special day for Mommy." Ethan frowned, as if trying to understand something beyond his grasp. "Is it like when we went to the park for the first time?" Emily chimed in, who had also approached. Ashley chuckled at the comparison. In some way, that simple question summarized exactly what she felt. A fear, like when she had taken them to the park for the first time, afraid something might go wrong. "Something like that, honey," she replied, hugging both children, seeking in them the calm she needed. The drive to the office felt long, or at least that's how Ashley perceived it. The morning traffic, the relentless symphony of honking horns and roaring engines, made her feel even more trapped in her anxiety. As she approached the glass skyscraper where her interview was to be held, the imposing building loomed before her like an unreachable mountain. Its walls reflected the cloudy sky, and for a moment, the cold morning seemed to seep inside her. She parked in front of the building and, before getting out, spent a few minutes sitting in the car. Her mind replayed the questions she might be asked and the answers she had practiced, but none seemed good enough. Her hands were cold, and sweat began to gather in her palms. She took a deep breath and recalled David's words that morning. "You're amazing at what you do, Ashley. This is just an interview. You have everything they need, they just have to see it," he had told her, hugging her before she left the house. The warmth of that memory gave her the strength to open the door and step out of the car. She knew she had done this before, that she had been a successful professional, but something about this return made her feel vulnerable in a way she had never experienced. The first meeting with Thomas. Upon entering the building's lobby, the morning hustle had already begun. The receptionist greeted her with a courteous, if somewhat distant, smile as she asked her to wait in the lounge. Large windows let in the daylight, but the atmosphere felt cold, distant, as if the glass walls kept the humanity of the outside world at bay in this corporate setting. As she waited, she observed the employees walking around her. Their immaculate suits, the hurried pace of their steps, all absorbed in their mobile devices, gave her a sense of disconnection. It was as if each one was in their own world, paying no attention to anyone else. That was when a different figure caught her attention. A man entered the building with a relaxed attitude, the opposite of everyone else. He was wearing a casual jacket, sneakers, and carrying a cycling helmet under his arm. His pace wasn't rushed, and, surprisingly, he greeted everyone he passed, from the receptionist to the cleaning staff. The contrast was striking. While the other employees barely looked up, this man radiated a warmth that seemed to brighten the space around him. "Good morning, Isabel," he said with a broad smile to the receptionist, who responded with a genuine gesture, as if only he could break her reserved demeanor. Ashley watched him curiously, trying to understand who this peculiar man was in an environment seemingly designed for coldness. Before she could reflect further, the same receptionist who had greeted the man called her. "Ashley, Mr. Thomas is ready to see you," she announced, indicating that she could go up to the corresponding floor. When she arrived at the office, she was surprised to find that the relaxed and friendly man she had noticed earlier in the lobby was, in fact, Thomas, the director and her interviewer. "Hi, I'm Thomas. Sorry to keep you waiting," he said with a warm smile as he extended his hand. His presence, so different from what Ashley had imagined for someone in a position of power, made her feel unexpectedly at ease. Thomas didn't fit the stereotype of the intimidating, distant boss. He seemed like someone who valued others, and despite his position, showed a friendly and approachable attitude. Thomas's office was a reflection of his personality. It wasn't the typical corporate office with cold, minimalist furniture. Instead, there was a wall full of photographs of Thomas participating in races and marathons. Trophies and medals adorned a nearby shelf, though, curiously, the photos weren't focused on the awards but on the camaraderie of the events. "I see you really enjoy sports," Ashley commented, trying to break the ice. "Yes, it's something that keeps me focused. It reminds me that, no matter the outcome, the important thing is to keep moving," he replied, with a smile that reflected an authentic passion. During the interview, the conversation flowed easily. Ashley demonstrated her capability and experience, and Thomas seemed genuinely interested in her answers. Everything seemed to be going well, but just as the interview was about to conclude, a small accident changed everything. Thomas, while moving some papers, accidentally knocked over a picture frame that was on his desk. Ashley, in an automatic reflex, bent down to pick it up. But when she saw the photo, it felt like the air was knocked out of her. It was an image of her mother, a photo she knew all too well, the same one that had hung in her living room for years. Shock paralyzed her. She placed the frame back on the table and tried to maintain her composure, but her mind was already trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked, noticing the tension in her face. Ashley nodded, though her mind was racing. The interview ended with Thomas congratulating her and telling her that his secretary would contact her to confirm the details of her hiring. But for Ashley, the job offer had been overshadowed by the mystery of the photo. Why did Thomas have an image of her mother on his desk? What did it mean? The ghosts of the past. The drive home was a mental storm for Ashley. Her thoughts raced wildly, trying to connect the dots. Her mother had passed away 8 years ago in a tragic car accident, an event that had left a deep scar on the family. It wasn't just the pain of losing someone so close, but the weight of everything her mother had meant to the community. As a teacher, she had touched many lives, but this was different. How could Thomas be connected to her? When she got home, David was waiting for her in the kitchen, preparing lunch for the kids. The usual warmth of her husband's smile was comforting, but she couldn't keep the story from him. "How did it go?" he asked, noticing her strange expression. Ashley, unable to contain her confusion any longer, told him everything. From the interview to the moment she saw the photo. David, at first, seemed as surprised as she was. "That can't be a coincidence, right?" he asked, trying to process the information. "I don't know, but I have to find out." "I need to know why Thomas has a picture of Mom," Ashley replied, her voice trembling with uncertainty. That night, as she tried to sleep, memories of her mother came flooding back. The afternoons in the park, her life lessons, and above all, her dedication to others. But none of those memories explained how Thomas could be connected to her. In the days that followed, Ashley tried to focus on her new responsibilities, but the doubt about the photo lingered. In every conversation she had with Thomas, she felt a barrier between them, a mystery left unresolved. Despite the warmth with which he treated her, she couldn't help but wonder what else he was hiding. That's when she decided she needed to confront him directly. One afternoon, when all the other employees had already left, Ashley gathered her courage and knocked on Thomas's office door. "Thomas, can I talk to you for a moment?" she asked, her voice slightly trembling. Thomas looked at her curiously, setting aside the documents he was reviewing. "Of course, Ashley. What's going on?" Ashley took a deep breath. She knew this conversation would change everything. "I wanted to ask you about the photo on your desk, the one of my mother. I recognized her, and I wonder how you got it." Thomas's face changed instantly. His expression became serious, almost solemn. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate about whether to continue, but finally nodded and invited her to sit. "Ashley, I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I think it's time you knew the truth," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "Your mother saved my life." Ashley looked at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "How was that possible?" "Many years ago, I suffered from a serious heart condition. I was on the waiting list for a transplant, but my chances were very slim. Until one day, I got the call that a compatible heart was available. That heart belonged to your mother." Ashley felt her world collapse around her. Tears began to fill her eyes as Thomas continued to speak. "After the transplant, I researched the person who had given me this new chance at life. When I discovered she was such a generous woman, dedicated to helping others, I knew I had to honor her memory. The photo you see on my desk is my way of remembering her every day. Her heart not only gave me a new life but also a new perspective. Since then, I've dedicated myself to doing good in her honor." Ashley could barely speak. The revelation had left her breathless. Tears streamed down her face, but it wasn't just sadness she felt. It was gratitude, relief, and a renewed connection to her mother. "I had no idea," she managed to say between sobs. "My mother was always someone special, but knowing her heart still lives, it's indescribable." New challenges and the ongoing legacy. From that day forward, the relationship between Ashley and Thomas changed forever. They weren't just colleagues, they were two people connected by a story of life and sacrifice. As the months went by, Thomas and Ashley began working together on more social projects, in honor of her mother's memory. The company not only thrived financially but also became a beacon of generosity in the community. However, life continued to test them. A new challenge arose when the company was attacked in the media for its donations to causes not everyone supported. Some critics claimed it was just a marketing strategy, while others questioned the transparency of the funds. Thomas, who had always acted with the best intentions, began to feel the weight of the accusations. "I don't understand how something that started as a way to honor your mother can be seen this way," Thomas said one afternoon, as he met with Ashley in his office. "I feel like everything I've done has no meaning." Ashley looked at him empathetically, knowing he had always acted from the heart. "Sometimes, when we try to do good, we face resistance from those who don't understand our motivations," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean we should stop. My mother gave you her heart, and you've used it to do something wonderful. Don't let this stop you." The external conflict only served to strengthen their relationship. Together, they overcame adversity, and the legacy of Ashley's mother continued to live on, not only in Thomas's heart but in the hundreds of lives they touched through their work. Years later, on every anniversary of her mother's death, Ashley and Thomas would gather to remember her life. It wasn't a meeting of sadness, but of gratitude. Both knew that her heart had united their lives in ways they never could have imagined, and that, thanks to it, her legacy of kindness and generosity would live on forever. Months passed, and Ashley and Thomas settled into their new working relationship, which had evolved far beyond the typical employer-employee dynamic. They were partners now, partners not only in business but also in honoring the legacy of Ashley's mother. Together, they pushed forward various social initiatives, creating scholarships in her name and expanding her community programs. However, the goodwill generated by their work soon attracted unwanted attention. A media outlet began investigating the company's donations, questioning whether the funds were being handled properly. Critics emerged, accusing the company of using philanthropy as a smokescreen for shady dealings. What had started as a noble mission was now under scrutiny, and both Ashley and Thomas felt the pressure mounting. Late one evening, after most employees had left the building, Ashley and Thomas remained in the office, going over the latest reports. The warm glow of the setting sun filtered through the large windows, casting long shadows across the room. Papers were spread across the desk, marked with red pen and highlighted sections, a chaotic reflection of their growing stress. "This doesn't make any sense," Thomas muttered, running a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "We've been transparent in everything we've done. Why are they doing this to us?" Ashley looked up from her notes, her face lined with concern. She had seen the strain these accusations were putting on Thomas. The man who had once been so sure of his path now seemed unsure, lost in the whirlwind of public opinion and legal inquiries. "They're doing it because controversy sells," she said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. "But we have to stay focused. The truth will come out eventually." Thomas sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The emotional weight of the situation was crushing him, and Ashley could see it. In that moment, he didn't look like the confident, easygoing man she had first met. He looked vulnerable, as if the burden of the world rested squarely on his shoulders. "Sometimes I wonder if all this was worth it," Thomas admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to honor your mother, to make a difference. But now it feels like I'm being torn apart for it." Ashley felt a pang in her chest. She had never seen him so defeated. She stood up, walking over to the window and gazing out at the city skyline bathed in the twilight. "You know, my mom used to say something when things got hard," Ashley began, her voice filled with quiet determination. "She'd say, kindness isn't about what you get back, it's about what you give, even when no one's watching." She never expected recognition for what she did. She just believed that doing good was worth it on its own. Thomas looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of hope in his gaze, as if Ashley's words had sparked something within him. "That's why we're doing this," she continued, turning to face him fully. "Because we believe in it. And even if people try to tear us down, we know the truth. We're making a difference. My mom's legacy is still alive because of you, because of the choices you made. Don't let them take that away from you." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Thomas stood and walked over to join her by the window. For a moment, they both stared out at the city below, a reminder of all the lives their work had touched. Despite the crisis, despite the doubts, there was a quiet resilience that began to build between them. Together, they could weather this storm. A call from the past. A few weeks later, just as things were beginning to calm down at the company, Ashley received an unexpected phone call. It was from an old family friend, Mrs. Reynolds, a former colleague of her mother's. Mrs. Reynolds had been a part of many of the social programs Ashley's mother had started, and over the years, they had lost touch. Hearing her voice brought back a flood of memories. "Ashley, dear, I've heard about everything you and Thomas have been doing," Mrs. Reynolds said warmly over the phone. "Your mother would be so proud." "Thank you," Ashley replied, her voice tinged with emotion. "We're trying to do our best." "I'm actually calling because I've come across something," Mrs. Reynolds said, her tone becoming more serious. "I was going through some of your mother's old papers, and I found a journal she kept about her work. There's something in there that I think you should see." Ashley's heart skipped a beat. Her mother had been gone for years, but the idea that there might still be pieces of her life left to uncover felt like a gift. Arranging to meet Mrs. Reynolds that afternoon, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that this journal might hold something important. Later that day, she arrived at Mrs. Reynolds' home, a quaint house that smelled of old books and fresh tea. The elderly woman greeted her with a warm hug before leading her to a small study, where she handed over the worn leather-bound journal. "She never showed this to anyone, not even me," Mrs. Reynolds said softly. "I think she wanted to keep some things private, but now I think you should have it." Ashley gently opened the journal, her hands trembling slightly. The first few pages were filled with her mother's familiar handwriting, and as she read, it felt as if her mother was speaking to her again. As Ashley read through her mother's journal that evening, she uncovered more than just stories of the social work her mother had done. There were notes about people whose lives her mother had touched, but there was something else, a name that appeared several times, underlined and circled: James Reynolds. Ashley furrowed her brow. She didn't recall ever hearing about a James Reynolds, and yet her mother had written extensively about him. The entries hinted at a deep connection, perhaps someone her mother had helped in a significant way. But the more Ashley read, the more questions arose. There were entries that spoke of an illness, a heart condition, and secret meetings that her mother had kept hidden from the family. Suddenly, the pieces began to click into place. James Reynolds. Could it be possible? Could Thomas's real name have been James Reynolds before his heart condition, before the transplant that changed his life? Ashley's pulse quickened as she realized there was a part of Thomas's past that she didn't know about, something that might explain why her mother's heart had ended up saving him. She needed to confront Thomas again, but this time, it wasn't just about honoring her mother's memory. It was about understanding the full scope of the sacrifice her mother had made. The next morning, Ashley walked into Thomas's office with the journal in hand. Her heart raced as she approached his desk, the weight of the revelation she had uncovered heavy in her chest. Thomas looked up from his computer, his expression curious as he saw her determined face. "Ashley, what's going on?" he asked, sensing the tension in the air. Without a word, Ashley handed him the journal, open to the pages about James Reynolds. Thomas took it, scanning the entries with a frown. As he read, his face paled, and he set the journal down slowly, as if the weight of his past had come crashing back onto his shoulders. "You knew my mother," Ashley said softly, her voice filled with a mix of emotions. "You were James Reynolds, weren't you? The man my mother helped, the man with the heart condition." Thomas swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I changed my name after the transplant. I didn't want to be the same person I was before. Your mother, she didn't just save my life with her heart. She helped me long before that, when I was at my lowest. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want anyone to see the man I was back then." Ashley's heart ached as she listened to him. Her mother had always been selfless, always putting others before herself, but the depth of her connection to Thomas James was more than she had ever imagined. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ashley asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me she had helped you before the transplant?" Thomas looked up, his eyes filled with regret. "I didn't think it was important anymore. I wanted to start over, to honor her without bringing my past into it. But now I realize, you deserve to know everything. Your mother, she changed my life in more ways than I can ever repay." Ashley stood there, her emotions swirling. She had come to learn the truth, and now she had it. But the truth was heavier than she expected, and the connection between her mother and Thomas ran deeper than she could have ever anticipated. In that moment, Ashley knew that the work they had started together wasn't just about honoring her mother's memory, it was about continuing the legacy of change, of transformation. Her mother had seen the potential in Thomas when no one else did, and now, it was their responsibility to carry that vision forward, to ensure that the kindness and generosity her mother had shown lived on in everything they did. In the months that followed, Ashley and Thomas worked harder than ever, not just to clear the company's name but to expand the reach of the social programs they had started. The media storm eventually passed, and the truth came out: their efforts were genuine, and the community stood by them. But more than anything, Ashley felt a sense of closure. Her mother's legacy wasn't just about the past. It was about the future, about the lives they were still changing, the people they were still helping. And though her mother was gone, Ashley could feel her presence in every decision they made, in every step they took together.